Hey Bible lovers, I'm Tim Nichols, and I'm here to bring you your Nichols worth. I have read 5 Bibles that are in the public domain, so I thought I'd go ahead and rank them according to which ones I enjoyed the most. In order to be in the public domain, it has to be placed in the public domain by the translators, whoever owns copyright to the translation itself, or it has to be over 100 years old. So 3 of these that I've read are in the public domain simply because of their age, but there are 2 that are modern translations that I've read that are in the public domain because of the choice of the translators and those who own rights to this translation. So let's go ahead and take a look. Coming in at number 5 is going to be the ASV. This was completed in 1901, and it was considered to be an update to the King James, really an update to the English Revised Version, not to be confused with the Revised Standard Version, because the Revised Version was an update to the King James in 1881, completed in 1885, but it was in the King's English or the Queen's English, whichever you want to say. And they wanted an American version of the update to the King James. So this really isn't an update to the King James, legally saying, because that has to be under the royal crown by the King or the Queen of England. This was the first update in American English to the King James Bible, and that hence called the American Standard Version. Now, what made this one controversial is it did not use the Textus Receptus as its text base, but it used the Westcott and Hort, which would eventually evolve into the Nestle and Aland, also known as the critical apparatus. This one has some problems that I didn't enjoy so much. First of all, the use of Jehovah as the divine name. I didn't like that. And also, there's some things about the deity of Jesus I thought were pretty questionable. I read this and I made a video about my reading experience. I'll go ahead and put that on the end screen so you can check that out. But coming in at number 5 is the ASV, also known as the American Standard Version. Coming in at number 4 is the Douay Rheims. Now, this is the one that was updated by Bishop Challoner. It also includes his textual footnotes. But I read through this, and while I really enjoyed the translation, there are a couple issues with it. For example, with Moses, it says Moses was horned instead of he had glory. There's also a part in Matthew where it says do penance rather than repent. In Genesis 3:15, it says that she, meaning Mary, shall crush the head of the serpent, and her heel shall be bruised, which seems to give Mary a little bit more authority in the redemptive plan, when ultimately that was referring to Jesus in nearly every other textual base. This is based off the Latin Vulgate, which came with its own set of controversies when it was translated by Jerome sometime in the 300-400s AD. But for a very long time, this was the only English translation of the Bible that was actually approved by the Catholic Church. The New American Bible, the New American Bible Revised Edition, of course, now we have the ESV CE, the RSV CE, and beyond. But for a while, for Catholics that spoke English, this was it. I enjoyed it, but it does have some issues. Coming in at number 3 is the World English Bible, and I really enjoyed this one. And what I really like about this is it also has an ecumenical edition that comes with the Apocrypha. And this is fully in the public domain. That was the goal of the translators from the start, was to create a modern English Bible in the public domain. This is actually considered an update to the ASV 1901, but it uses the majority text in the New Testament rather than the Textus Receptus or the Nestle and Aland critical apparatus. I thought that was pretty cool. There's some minor differences in the textual manuscripts, but I didn't notice anything super major. I really enjoyed my read through of this and the NJV, the New Jerusalem version, which is considered an update to the ASV, and it uses the footnote system of the WEB. But coming in at number 3, the WEB, also known as the World English Bible. Coming in at number 2 is the King James Version. Now, this is an interesting one because it's in the public domain in the United States, but it is not in the public domain in England. And that is because it is still under perpetual copyright from the Crown, because it was issued from the Crown, namely King James I. And there are 3 publishers that are able to print the King James in England, and that is obviously Cambridge University Press, Oxford University Press, and surprise, surprise, HarperCollins UK is able to print. All 3 of those use the 1769 Oxford, also known as the Blayney text, but this happens to be one from a publisher called Smith & Jones, and they claim to use the pure Cambridge edition that was updated in 1900 and is really the calling card and the main textual base for most of your US KJV only movements. So while this is in public domain in the United States and in most of the world, in England it is not. It still has to be printed under permission, and for most, that's the 1769 Oxford edition, also known as the Blaney edition. There are differences between the Cambridge edition. I believe there's some punctuation and some spelling and some modernized wording and some pronoun capitalizations and all that. I'm not smart enough, nor have I spent enough time in both of them to really know the differences, but I know there are little differences, and I also know that the pure Cambridge edition, also known as the PCE, is considered the gold standard for most of our King James only people. So there you go, King James, also in the public domain because it was most recently updated, mostly in 1769. Now, what may be a big surprise to a lot of people is my number one public domain translation is the Berean Standard Bible. I absolutely love these translations. I have read every one of these translations, some of them multiple times. But this one really strikes that perfect balance. It gives me kind of NIV, CSB vibes to where it's just in the middle, where it renders beautifully enough that it sounds like the Bible, but it renders modern enough that it's understandable and readable. You don't get hung up in a lot of spots. It does have a little bit more of a dynamic approach, more than a literal or formal approach, but I really enjoyed this. And the thing I love about this more than anything is its extensive footnotes. This is based off the Nestle and Aland text, but they do consult the Septuagint. They consult more textual manuscripts than even the New King James, which is pretty impressive. They do the Textus Receptus, the majority text, and beyond. And in 2023, they went ahead and put this in the public domain so it can be used freely and without restriction. So really awesome. Absolutely love this. They're coming out with a third edition of this text. Now I want to do a couple of honorable mentions, and I've never read these, so I don't know a whole lot about them. But I mentioned earlier the Revised English Version, or the Revised Version, that was completed in 1885 in England. This translation is also in the public domain because it's over 100 years old. And then the Darby translation. I don't know much about this. I do know that he's considered the father of dispensationalism, and I don't know how that affects his translation. I've never read either of these, so I just figured I'd mention them honorably simply because they are in the public domain. And they are in print, although the Revised Version and the Darby edition can be a little bit difficult to find. They are out there floating around. You just got to do a little digging. So the reason I made this video is because a lot of people say that they update Bibles in order to make money. And if you hold that conviction, which I do not, I think they update Bibles in order to keep them modern. Now, I am not a fan of textual updates. I'll put my thoughts on that in the end screen as well. But you do have options if you feel that way with the King James, with the Berean Standard Bible, with the World English Bible, with the ASV, which isn't exactly in print, but you can still find it. I believe Star Publishing just released a new batch of them that are currently in print, but you can find copies of the ASV on eBay. And then, of course, the Douay Rheims, which you can still find in print from TAN Publishing, also known as Benedictus Press, and Baronius Press still print the Douay Rheims. I'm sure there's others out there that print it as well, but they're pretty easily accessible. So the BSB is pretty easily accessible. The WEB is fairly easily accessible through Broken Yoke Publishing. And I'll put some links to their websites below so that you can check those out. And of course, the King James is among the most easily accessible Bibles in the world because many publishers print the New King James to include Thomas Nelson, Lifeway, and beyond. Now, if you're looking for a pure Cambridge edition, they are printed, but it's not real common. I know that Church Bible Publishers prints a Cambridge edition, and Smith & Jones produces a very expensive, what they call Cambridge edition. I'm not sure if it's actually the pure Cambridge or not. And then local Church Bible Publishers, and there's a few others. Just do your homework and check it out to see if you get the public domain Bible that you're looking for. God bless you. Keep calm. Jesus on. This is your Nicholsworth.